At face value, the FBI's approach sounds highly intuitive and appealing. However, one major issue with it is it's unclear, aside from the original study conducted by interview with serial sexual murderers, how these associations between crime scene characteristics and offender characteristics have actually come about. Traditionally, the FBI in their accounts have placed great emphasis on their investigators' field experience, and they cite this as the key factor that underpins the associations that they assert. So a key question is, how well do these profiles actually perform? Although there have been many anecdotal examples and unpublished reports claiming the success of the FBI's method of profiling, there are in fact very few published empirical analyses, and each of these are controversial in their own way. However, as an illustrative study, we will go back to one of the first. And these were conducted by Anthony Pinozzotto with the collaboration of the FBI. In a paper published in 1990, Anthony Pinozzotto and Norman Finkel sought to determine whether professional profilers were more accurate than non-profilers in generating personality profiles and correctly identifying offender features from crime scene details. They also wanted to explore whether the processes used by the profilers were qualitatively different from the processes used by non-profilers. Now, in total, they had 28 participants who were categorised on the basis of their profiling expertise. And we're going to concentrate on just 24 of those participants. These were 6 police detectives who made up the profilers group. That is, they'd all been specifically trained in profiling. They'd completed a 1-year program through the FBI Behavioural Science Unit and had a range of 1 to 6 years experience in actually profiling. The second group was a group of detectives. This group was made up of 6 detectives from a large metropolitan city police department. Now, these officers had no training in profiling, but they were experienced police investigators in homicide and sex offence cases, which were the 2 crimes chosen for this study. The third group were a group of clinical psychologists, and the fourth group was a group made up of students. In each of these were 6 participants who met the criteria, and they were selected as non-police participants who were both naive to profiling and criminal investigations. All participants were given materials from 2 closed cases, that is, these crimes had actually already been solved. One case involved a homicide and the other a sex offence. In both cases, participants were provided with information about the victim and also the crime scene reports. So for the sexual offence, they detailed the events leading up to the offence, what actually occurred in the offence itself, and the events that followed the offence. In addition, in this case, participants also read a detailed victim statement, what happened and what the offender did and said. Now, in the homicide case, participants were given 14 black and white crime scene photos. They were also given autopsy and toxicology reports. Now, these detailed the cause, the manner and the mode of death. And the toxicology report showed whether there were any chemical agents present in the victim's system at the time of death that may have caused or contributed to the death. Now, in both cases, in order to protect the identity of the victim, some information that would normally be made available to profilers, such as maps of the geographical area where the crimes took place, were actually absent. So all participants read both cases and they balanced the order. So some read the homicide case first and the others read the sexual offence case first. Now, after they read each case, they were asked to cover the material and write down as many details about the case that they were able to remember. They then had to use this to note down all the details from the crime scene that they felt were necessary and important to be used in writing a profile about the type of person who would commit such a crime. And also note down why they felt these facts were important. They were also then asked to write a profile of the type of person who committed the crime and to give as much detail as possible. And then they had to record this onto audio tape. Finally, they were given a multiple choice question sheet. This consisted of 20 questions about the suspect, questions about their age, their gender, their residence, their employment. Now, 15 of these could be scored as being correct or not. And as a very last step, they completed a line-up task. Participants were given 5 descriptions of possible suspects, and they had to rank order them from 1, the suspect they thought who was most likely to have committed the crime, down to 5, the person least likely to have committed the crime. So what did they find on these measures? Well, the analysis indicated that profilers provided richer and longer reports than the non-profilers in terms of the number of predictions, for example. Critically, however, they also provided significantly more accurate predictions in both cases. Profilers were significantly more accurate than the non-profiler groups. However, when their responses to the multiple choice questions were analysed, profilers only scored significantly better than the other three groups combined for the sexual offence case. Similarly, when looking at the lineup results, the superior ability of the profilers to identify the correct offender only emerged in relation to the sexual offence. It didn't emerge on either measure in the homicide case. Finally, when looking at how profilers used the information they were given, to see if the way they used it differed from how other participants used their information, they found no evidence that the profilers assessed the information in a qualitatively different way from the non-profilers. So this study gives us a mixed picture of how profilers actually perform. Professional profilers provided richer profiles. They made more accurate predictions in their written profiles than participants belonging to the other groups. Further, professional profilers were more accurate in terms of multiple choice responding and in picking out the perpetrator for a lineup for the sex offence case than non-profilers, but those accuracy differences were not seen in the homicide case. Here, profilers performed just as well, or rather just as poorly, as detectives, psychologists and students. So why? Was the version of the homicide case just too sanitised? Or the profilers noted that information they'd expected to see when constructing a profile was actually missing in this study? Or was it more to do with the fact that the homicide offender did not fit the base rates in all ways? And this shows an inherent problem in profiling. What if your offender isn't a statistically normal or a typical offender?